Hold the pressures.
There we go.
Pressures.
Recording
Okay.
is going. All right, go ahead.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the continued talks on the 10 seed groups. Today and in February, I will be discussing Seed Group 5, the political organizers. Today is part 1 of 2. For this discussion, I will not be concerned with specific problems and solutions of politicians or governments of what they're facing today. For these problems directly are related to the individual's awareness and response to world problems. The higher response should be related to the outpouring spirit in our lives and the world as it arises from the development of group consciousness. The group here is community, the nation, and the larger group humanity. The potential here is for the awakening of human consciousness through the New Group of World Servers, or the service workers, through their participation in group work in helping to manifest and bring conscious awareness to elements of the plan. Group work in an esoteric sense is an activity that brings various parties together in united activity, motivated by the higher spirit and not by the individual or separated human personality. For the political organizers group, their higher potential exists at the ashramic level, where the subjective life exists through the pure expression of the heart and knowingness for the working out of the plan. To understand how we as humanity can achieve this goal, I'll be examining some ideas, driving energies, and dynamics about how the political organizers group can potentially work. Some of the central themes throughout today's talk are around the nature of crisis intention, the nature of the will energy and its expression, and right leadership and the concept of leader versus statesman. Seed Group 5, the political organizers. In Dino 1, the Tibetan describes them as organizers, inferring that the workers in this group will facilitate right political and social order within community, a nation, or civilization. They work through the expression of the will, an aspect of Shambhala, under the laws of service and group progress. Their objective is to bring about cohesive relationship between people and nations, and for demonstrating how the divine will works out in consciousness. As much as the higher levels of consciousness, at the much higher levels of consciousness, the hierarchical department of Manu oversees government in humanity, while the Mahakoan oversees civilization. Both of these entities provide a higher inspired pattern of the plan to be imposed upon the lower 18 subplanes for bringing about change within civilization. The political organizers group strives to make mankind aware that it is collectively part of one humanity, irrespective of nation, race, color, language, or stage of evolutionary path. New Group of World Servers or service workers do not take sides, but instead seek to work from the center to bring interested parties together with the objective of addressing issues in a non-partisan manner. Major function of the service workers is to act as a bridge between humanity, hierarchy, and the ashrams. While doing this, they invoke thought forms, ideas, and impressions from higher sources and turn them into creative solutions that aids in the redemption and upliftment of humanity. Success with this group will also depend upon the work of the educators, what I talked about last month. Under the law of group progress, the service workers come into rapport and alignment with the higher aspects of the subjective group and its purpose. New Group of World Servers or service workers respond to inspiration from impression and telepathic interplay from the inner group at the ashramic level and hierarchy. In addition, dissipating glamour and illusion, such as a distortion of the truth, is also a major function of this group. As the group moves further into the Aquarian age, spiritual progress will be focused on the expansion of group consciousness and not individual unfoldment or individual development. As the political organizers group moves further into the Aquarian age, again, spiritual progress will be focused on three major activities. One, the expansion of group consciousness, such as what is best for the community or the nation. Two, the skillful use of the incoming seventh ray of synthesis through right administration. And three, through the development of the group nation, not the individual separative activity or nation. This is the bringing together of diverse groups working together in cooperation with each other toward a common purpose. A higher objective of the political organizer for today's world would be for the inspired spokesperson, a visionary leader or statesman, to impart a mindset that is beyond the corruption of money, power, or ambition, but has a love for humanity and the environment, working in cooperation together. These people are spokespersons. These types of persons are leaders across all seed groups who can foster a new vision. DK says, or uses the expression, by lifting up the little ones, they seek to consider all future generations and create a system where no one is left out or behind. Political organizers also would be ones who can see and communicate the national and global situation whole, and not just the separate parts that favors the individual person, group, corporation, or nation. They would be those who can comprehend multiple systems, interrelationships, and interdisciplinary systems, such as the seed groups working together, and be able to relate them together. In next month's talk, we'll be examining the concept of vision and around the new vision for humanity. So continuing here with the three planetary centers, this is a familiar diagram to many of you or all of you. A major theme in today's talk is about the energy of will, the will energy and how it's used. And as we know, there are three major planetary centers, Shambhala, hierarchy, and humanity, each with its own expression of will. The Shambhalic energy is esoterically called the center where the will of God is known. It represents the first aspect, will purpose, and is made up of the combined energies of will, love, and intelligence. As custodians of the plan, hierarchy receives and interprets the plan as will, love, and intelligence, and steps it down to humanity. Will and purpose coming from Shambhala is the first ray. And it represents a willful purpose of bringing together diverse forces to create synthesis. This is the focus of the one great spiritual tension of will, love, and active intelligence, together representing the divine will. What we call love wisdom, acted out on the physical plane, or even on the astral plane too, is coming from the hierarchy. It's an energy coming from the second ray through the medium of Buddhi. The energy of the third ray, or active intelligence, comes to humanity on the physical plane, and it works out as man seeking intelligent solutions through the higher mind. In this work, the service workers receive impressions and act as intermediaries between hierarchy and humanity for implementing the plan. Individually and as a group, they are called by Lucis Trust units of service and function at the level of the ajna center of the planet. In each of these three planetary centers, Shambhala, hierarchy, and humanity, and units of service are closely interrelated and as a whole represent the spiritual potential for divine livingness. We note also on subjective levels that the Christ and the Buddha are they exist or live, as much as we can call it live. They exist beyond the 49 planes, excuse me, also, and they act as influences for implementing the plan. The right use or implementation of these energies can positively affect and influence change and behaviors of leaders in government and those with influence in all sectors and departments, seed groups of society. The expressions of the will found in rays and initiations, it says, when the avatar of synthesis comes, he will galvanize the three groups, the three planetary centers, the directing agents of Shambhala, the Nirmanakayas, and the New Group of World Servers, and relate them to each other so that a new synthesis and alignment will be present on the earth. In essence, this great being will act as the custodian of the will and thus create a basic triangle of force between the three major centers, hierarchy, humanity, and Shambhala, representing the planetary life. I'll be talking more in detail about the expressions of the will shortly. Each of the ray energies affect the leader's personal psychology and character for making decisions and influencing outcomes. For example, how does the individual use the energy of will, the first ray energy, and how does he react emotionally or respond intelligently to life's circumstances and challenges? Or consider how he acts on soul urges, whether he's conscious of it or not, how he makes decisions, perhaps using the second or the sixth ray with more compassionate understanding. Incidentally, if you want to understand the rays better, the Makara website has considerable information on this. And of course, Alice Bailey's 2 books on the subject, which is Esoteric Psychologies, Volume 1 and 2. Before I go on, does anybody have any questions or comments about what I've said so far?
I don't see anything right now, but I have given the attachments to everybody in the chat box. So
Okay,
if you joined just recently and don't see them, let me know and I'll put them in there again.
great. Continuing. Higher influences and working out through the first and seventh rays. At the highest levels of the cosmic physical plane, the hierarchical department of Manu influences government in humanity, while the Mahakoan oversees civilization. Their influence is through impression. Both of these entities provide a higher inspired pattern of the plan to be imposed in the lower 18 subplanes, bringing about change within civilizations. These energies never infringe upon mankind's free will. The energy of will, or first ray, is anchored in the solar system, and Shambhala impresses the planetary purpose as an energy through the planetary logo Sanat Kumara. The first ray energy of will is influencing from the ashrams via Shambhala impacts and with the energy of the will to good. From Rays and Initiations, DK says, the encouraging factor today that the activity humanity itself is for the first time concerned with the entire subject of willfully enabling right human relations and how to bring it about. It signifies that humanity is responding to the will and the intention of Shambhala. The higher subjective and spiritual work of the political organizers group is to influence the consciousness of races and nations. They understand that the energies of the heart must merge with the higher mind of the soul in order for the divine will to work itself into consciousness. Their work involves invoking the souls of nations. They work within political systems, government, and ideologies, thus facilitating the gradual improvement of relations between nations. Seed Group 5, the political organizers, is a focal point for directing the will to good. Their intention is to create and maintain international and national law. Further, they are responsible for the enforcement of peacekeeping roles through the United Nations as a vehicle for enabling the spirit of peace. GK said that all the seed groups are an experiment which has for its objective the manifestation of certain types of energy on the physical plane. This will, when effectively functioning, produce a cohesion, at-one-ment, and synthesis in humanity. With the incoming seventh ray of energy, synergy, the practice of cooperation and goodwill allows for the goal of international unity to be realized between groups or nations. This requires an impersonal approach as they move away from the needs of the individual group or nation to that of the needs of the larger group, humanity. The energy of the seventh ray subjectively facilitates international cooperation and synthesis, or the working together towards peaceful ends. To this end, service workers employ, or they embody, the principles of synthesis, seventh ray energy, as a differentiating agent in international and national life. An example of the seventh ray influence in the world took place with the formation of the NATO alliance after World War II to curb the Soviet threat. Today, NATO continues to be a viable force in international relations that contains aggressive and aberrant actions by disrupting nations, such as Russia invading Ukraine in 2014. Alice Bailey indicated that there is an overshadowing of the United Nations by the avatar of synthesis, for working out of conflicts, tensions, through cooperation and goodwill. Also, an embryonic form of this international unity or brotherhood already exists in the United Nations, which generally works to maintain global peace. Another major function of the United Nations is providing service-related activities through various departments, such as ending hunger, poverty, providing healthcare, and promoting education worldwide. However, since its inception, in the 1940s, the UN is an entity comprised of rivalries and mistrust rather than goodwill and right human relations. Despite the problems of the United Nations, it continues to provide a significant thought form of cooperation through its departmental activity, the spirit of mutual interrelationship, and this is the seed of the future. Any questions from anybody?
No, I don't see any right now.
All right. Working with crisis. Someone once said, if you don't have a crisis in your life, find one. I seem to recall that being Michael Robbins, but I'm not sure. On the face of it, it sounds pretty bizarre and even counterintuitive, as we typically want to find peace in our lives and not crisis. Much of the work at the heart of the political organizers group is about crisis management. This can be mitigating crises, whether local, national, or internationally based. From Raids and Initiations, DK says, crisis hastens certain realizations. Forget not that humanity grows through the presentation of moments of crisis. These moments of crisis are based on past karma, conditioned by the point in evolution already achieved, and on the presence in the three worlds, that's the mental, emotional, physical planes, that certain appropriate ray forces are brought to the point of precipitator by united decision of the conclave of masters. These decisions do not affect man's free will. At this point, I would like to make a comparison of how the individual aspirant disciple goes through crises, esoterically understood, to finally arrive at awareness and revelation with expanded consciousness. For this discussion, I will define crisis as a decisive point or situation in consciousness where conflict reaches its highest tension and must be resolved into expanded awareness. Each single human being has been exposed to some form of crisis in his or her life, be it mental, emotional, or physical levels. So we all know what it's like. Fortunately, we are not in this continually, otherwise not much would be accomplished in our lives or in the world. Do you have the courage to face challenges that upend your normal routine? Many people bury their emotional pain and want to get through the crisis as soon as possible. That's natural, as nobody wants to dwell in pain and suffering. But as we know, crisis must be faced, and there must be a means for moving through it. For the individual disciple, perhaps leader, a member of the seed group 5, and who is relatively awake in a spiritual sense, when he or she is in crisis, his consciousness is actually experiencing the crisis as a series of conflicting thought forms or energies in a crucible. Esoterically, we call it a burning ground through the fire of mind. Yes, he may feel stress, tension, and even fear, but in order to move past and expand his consciousness, he will have to willfully take the energy and remake it with love, inclusiveness, acceptance, and awareness in his consciousness. When he has successfully done this, he will have dissipated and transformed the power into something more life-giving and brought a wholeness to himself. His awareness and vision expands. For the political organizers group, crises and unresolved problems abound everywhere. Today's world, there are many clear and defined problems. For example, gun violence, corruption, denial of voting rights to everyone, and climate change related legislation. If you are coming from a space of cooperation and goodwill, problems such as these can be resolved relatively easily, as all the parties involved would theoretically want to resolve the problem, cooperate, and help anyone who could be harmed. But as we know, the fact speaks a different story. Many factions, such as lobbyists and many legislators, may debate an issue, but does not resolve it as in their interest or focus only in what is in it for them and not what is best for the community or people in general. So the issue persists unresolved. Referring back to the major issues facing the nation or humanity, the individual politician or legislature, as disciple, must confront and deal with the conflicting energies or forces in consciousness. The reality is that there are many people that are offering positive and life-giving solutions to pressing problems humanity is facing, but they are mostly blocked by the forces, usually capitalistic and selfish, and by people whose interests only benefit them and not the greater group in need. Perhaps they need to apply a first-ray wisdom and confront the dark forces or the evil that wants to block the higher need for the nation or humanity. A disciple leader would show how positive seventh-ray synthesis related activities can work out. Examples of activities could be adjusting for climate change, protecting the environment for future generations. This is one example of a project that can directly aid the nation and humanity. Additional points on crisis and initiation for the disciple. Think also of the community or the nation as a disciple initiate who is also going through a change in consciousness. The example here could be having a national conversation about voting rights for everyone, or how legislation to control guns would benefit everyone. Everyone who is immersed in the crisis and seeking resolution of these problems are also subject to the change and transformation in their own individual consciousness. We note that during crisis, the soul impulses its intention into the lower personality and demonstrates a mastery over its lower reflection of the mental, emotional, and physical vehicles. The results are purification and transformation, resulting in awareness and illumination. When speaking of crisis for the disciple or nation, the initiate leader of the nation, such as Franklin Roosevelt back in the time of World War II, evokes a wise application of love, higher reasoning, and a higher spiritual will into his service work, such as programs of the New Deal. From his experience of working with the working out of these programs, which are actually thought forms put forward into activity, he develops a knowingness about how to dissipate illusion, neutralize the depression and economic instability. This resulted in bringing complete understanding at a national level with these dynamics in mind and how they contribute towards achieving expanded awareness for the nation. Any comments or questions from anyone about anything?
No, I don't see anything yet.
All right, let's continue. Human and divine will. An initial discussion about will is about whether man is driven by his own free will or divine will. Human free will, the idea of free will allows man to be able to take more than one possible course of action under a given set of circumstances. Free will is closely linked to the concepts of moral responsibility, praise, guilt, sin, and other judgments which apply only to actions that are freely chosen. It is also connected with the concepts of advice, persuasion, deliberation, and prohibition. Man may be consciously aware of different streams of force in his environment, some of which may be beyond his control. In the world, his free will has been infringed on by authoritative control, dogma, ideology, and even corporations who have imposed their will and therefore obstructed personal growth. When man becomes spiritually awake, he can put himself in a position where he can take advantage of these forces or not, simply by an active will with his mind. Of course, a measure of courage may also be needed. This is most often associated with actions of the lesser motivations of the personality. When the awake man begins to be motivated by a higher vibration, such as the soul, his sense of free will changes. He may have free will within his own personal sphere or local community by sharing his skill and knowledge. The sharing is carried out via his personal will, so his will can overlap with others and become a force for influence and change. When wills are opposing each other, there are clashes. This requires the opposing parties to consider a course of action. The effect can also depend on the strength of a single person or a group will united in a common cause. In a worldly context, a person may have a strong personality or someone with vision whom people can follow. There are untold examples of people who have expressed their will and influence or played a role in local, state, and international affairs. This is most evident when certain political forces, through legislation or presidential decree, impose their will upon the masses. The results of their action are often mixed and often benefit the selfish few instead of the larger public. On the other hand, political and governmental forces can help to bring about the harmonization of the wills of people, replacing competition with cooperation, conflict with negotiation and agreement. Within the cosmic physical plane, the expression of will has different degrees of manifestation. From the plane of the Atma, the will is a full expression of the monad. From the Buddhic plane, you have the expression of will comes through perfect reason and poise. From the plane of manas, or the mind, it comes through as intelligence. These are expressions of the will coming from the monad, filtering down to the lower planes. The lesser personality can express as selfish free will and separative consciousness. In one of its most base forms, it can be a manifestation of erotic desire, bullying, or aggressive tendencies. In an esoteric context, many people are meeting daily to use their wills for meditation and provide influence on the inner planes, such as using the great invocation in triangles or meditation for healing. This type of focused will constitutes an expression of focused spiritual force. Now, on the divine will, I spoke that the higher or divine will is coming from Shambhala and represents the will to good, and it expresses as divine ideation. This energy is stepped down to humanity via the hierarchy, and it manifests as the three aspects of will, purpose, love, wisdom, and active intelligence. Hierarchy cannot interfere, but as guides of the race, they influence man and ultimately humanity through impression. This enables man to use his will in accordance with the divine will and for positive change. As man spiritually evolves and his personality is becoming integrated with the soul, his willpower increases. The aspirant or disciple learns how the divine will works in his consciousness by wielding energy and force through the power of his will. He can choose to mediate, or he can choose to meditate and control his desire nature for overcoming glamour and illusion by using the technique of light and the as-if technique. And those at handout techniques for working in consciousness should be available, I believe, either through the chat or on Makara.
I'll have to look. I don't recall that right now, but
Okay,
I wanted to tell you, you have a couple of comments.
please do. Yes, go ahead.
Karen wants to know, she said, you mentioned having a national discussion about voting rights. I recently heard someone suggest we have a cabinet position on democracy. Biden recently held a summit on democracy. Perhaps this is a step in the direction.
Yes, actually, when you're talking about voting, and when you're talking about free will or the divine will, you're ultimately talking about the concept of freedom. And of course, when we talk about democracy, freedom means you're able to go and you personally, individually, your vote counts. That's the theory. And it doesn't always happen that way, unfortunately. And there are those who believe that only they have the answer and they want to suppress voting rights. That's here in the United States. And certainly there's authoritative governments around the world that they call themselves democracies. Like, for example, in Russia, they call it a democracy where it's really basically a dictatorship by Vladimir Putin. But to answer your question, it's yes, there should be a national conversation and mentioned by all people in government, from the legislators, House and the Senate, from other countries. I guess you'd call it your head of your government, your prime minister, whoever, president. These people need to be talking about the need for people to engaging in democracy all the time. So this becomes a thought form as a way of being, that we do have choice in our society for making changes and influence. There's much more that could be said there, but I'm not sure about creating a cabinet position. That's something that's, I'm not sure about the wisdom of that, but certainly here in the United States, the Senate and the House passing the voting rights legislation is absolutely key for maintaining our democracy.
Okay,
Go ahead.
thank you. There's another one, but what was the handout that you wanted?
It's techniques for working in consciousness. It should be a 3-page handout. And then there's also, there's another handout coming soon, which I'll talk about too. So.
Oh, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it was from workshop number 2.
Oh,
all right,
sure,
now,
okay.
Jan says, is it a matter of connecting free will to be in service of divine will? Is it simply by believing, not my will, but thine be done? then
Well,
are we using with free will in connection with divine will?
Another, you sort of step back a moment here, and a major concept to understand is, quote, humanity is waking up. And there's many, many people around the world, whether they're conscious of it or not, most people are not going to understand the esoteric dynamics about waking up or the awakening process. And there's many people that support human rights. Well, this is a divine inspiration for people to be non-separative and invoking a concept of unity. So this is happening around the world, and the protesters in Belarus, the protesters in Kazakhstan recently, protesters in Russia, protesters in China, they're all opposing tyranny that are imposing on their personal free will. So yeah, they are responding to the inner subjective impression of free will, and they want the divine will is actually coming through them also, although they're not going to articulate those same words. I'm sure this is basically terms that Blavatsky and Alice Bailey, DK, articulated. You see, it's all based on people coming together and waking up and working individually, connecting with groups, and then the group gets out there and, I guess you in a streetwise sense, they start making noise, they start protesting, and they start contacting their legislators or their house members or their people in the Senate, whatever. So it's just a constant tension. I'll be talking about tension very soon. Or is that next month? Maybe that's next month. But anyhow, there's spiritual tension. There's a lot of these concepts I'm talking about here are all interrelated, and they're all a major thought form of the higher planes. And the thought form is the plan that wants to work out. That hierarchy is the custodian of that plan, the thought form that it needs to be worked out. And everybody is responding to will in different ways. And this is only a fraction of what I'm talking about today. And I'm sure you have your ideas too. But anyhow, are there any other questions or comments?
No, that's all I see. Thank you.
All right, let's continue with the concept of the problems of will and authority. John Adams, statesman, diplomat, and second president of the United States around 1800 said, "Government is instituted for the common good, for the protection, safety, prosperity, and happiness of the people, and not for the profit, honor, or private interest of one man, family, or class of men." DK said the political organizers group carries with it a certain authority or use of the will that other seed groups do not have. This authority ultimately comes from Shambhala and hierarchy via impression to help bring about international understanding and unity between cultures and nations. Obviously, this requires much wisdom on their part, as impressions must always be impersonal and allow mankind to retain free will. The Tibetans said, this group, political organizers, will facilitate right organization of society through the expression of will. Hierarchy and Shambhala impress the energy of will mainly through group energy under the laws of service and group progress. They understand that unless there is an underlying guiding energies of love, wisdom, and the energy of synthesis, the will energy becomes a destroyer and obviously can cause problems on the physical plane. It is only until the mid-20th century or so that the destroyer aspect was kept from humanity, as mankind is still learning the wisdom of its use. When members of the political organizers group impose their will, often there's friction and destruction as old personality-oriented ways resist change. This is most evident when extreme views from different political parties are vying for power and want to bend the human will to their wants and desires. When discussing the political organizers group, we have to consider the expression of will as a force by the individual. that is the elected leader by a group or a political party within society. All are motivated by thought. So we need to ask, how is the individual or group expressing himself mentally, emotionally, or physically? Note that the expression of will, the individual does not have to be conscious of what he says or does in the esoteric sense. This is, of course, has resulted in a disjointed and misaligned world, which we have, where the soul is not dominating our life's expression. If we look at the expression of will in everyday life, we see legislators, the judiciary, the police, and the military are all extensions of the will of government for the enforcement of laws and to keep the peace. When an individual uses a weapon, such as a gun, a knife, his or her own body, or even a large pickup truck or SUV, these can be instruments of intimidation and abuse of the lower personality's will. The broadcast media is or can be an instrument of lies, intimidation, and deception of facts or obvious truth. Again, the power of the personality's will. Within the workplace, the manager, supervisor, or the boss imposes his or her will. And there's also the will of the voters, that is the masses, when there's a democracy. So we have to ask the question, what guides them? Are they collectively represent a focused will toward a particular desired outcome, as we just previously talked about. We have the will of government. Most people have a relative awareness of their will and how it can affect others. With this awareness must also come a sense of responsibility, and ideally with a measure of compassion and understanding. This is especially true for people, the political organizers group, who make decisions that affect the lives of millions of people through the rhetoric of legislators, the head of the country, or even judges who interpret the law and mete out justice. From externalization of the hierarchy, DK said, the objective of all true governmental control is right synthesis, leading to right national and interior group activity. This would be a type of authority which should be recognized by the peoples. Today, we have the problem of the methods. We are moving towards such a condition of world consciousness and are on our way toward experimenting with it. So again, the fifth group, political organizers, communicates the quality of imposition and the authority that is lacking in the other seed groups of this divine group activity. This work is largely first-ray work. It will embody the method whereby the divine will works out in the consciousness of races and nations to promote an international understanding. Members of this group will have much first-ray energy in their equipment. Their work is to act as channels of communication between the Department of Manu and the race of men. Of course, this is on a subjective level.
David?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry. Vivian says on the 3rd of January 2022, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council agreed to prevent nuclear war, pledging to this the details to be worked through signature later this year. The 5 members being China, Russia, UK, US, and France. And the reason given is that there will be no winners.
Yes, that's reminiscent of what President Kennedy said in his inaugural address, 1961, where he said that the winner will have ashes in his mouth, or some paraphrase like that. You know, the nuclear war has no winner. So it's a concept there, and that's an outstanding, noble concept for them to say that. Although on a level less than nuclear weaponry, they are still using, China and Russia, for example, are still using intimidation around the world to other neighboring nations. So it's an outstanding concept to say that, and it definitely need to be said, but there's still a lot of work to be done to bring those 5 members of the Security Council together and to say, we need to stop conflict around the world and of course, DK said, in order for the reappearance of the Christ to take place, there has to be a measure of peace established in the world. And I'll be talking about this concept in a little bit more in today's talk, and then next month also in the second part of the political organizers talk. Okay, let's see, moving on. Oh, this is a favorite quote of mine that I didn't want to let go of. From James F. Clark, I believe he was in the House of Representatives of the United States in the late 19th century. And he said the difference between a politician and a statesman is that a politician thinks of the next elections while the statesman thinks about the next generations. That is so true today. We want to keep this meaning of this quote in mind as I talk about leadership and statesmanship shortly. First, we're going to talk about glamour and power. One of the great challenges of the political organizers groups is offsetting glamour and illusion within government. All of those working within government, including initiates and disciples, down to an everyday person, are all susceptible to these energies. On the surface, glamour in the political sense is represented as ambition, corruption, and exercising an authoritarian control over others. The other end of the spectrum rests in the distant future when there are rulers within government who are monadically connected. But here in 2022, the service worker stands between the two extremes and seeks to find truth. He initially identifies the energy as a glamour of authority. This is a glamour that exists on the astral plane and is the illusion of power existing on the mental plane. Both are formed around the distortion of an ideal. Glamour and illusion are found within when the individual or authoritarian government imposes a rule or set of laws on the masses. This form of authority controls people through arousing fear and intimidation. These energies can only exist as long as the individual or masses of people are ignorant of the dynamics of their own personality. The glamour of the imposing authority revolves around desiring something for the separated self for selfish reasons. It's all about putting the individual's needs above the needs of the group or nation for personal power and gain. The illusion of power happens when the mind of the individual is illumined and his etheric body is filled with light from the soul. If his heart is closed or any part of the lower personality is emphasized, it will distort the soul's pure light. This glamour can be offset by aligning with the soul and possessing a desire to love and to serve others. This would enable the practice of right human relations with all whom he interacts with. The political organizer functions best when the higher group needs are met and there are no personal ambitions present. The only authority recognized is the truth inspired from the soul as it emerges in consciousness, resulting in the expression of right human relations. When the disciple feels fear controlling him, he can invoke courage and guard against it by aligning with the soul's light of truth. From that point, he can then demand that truth come forth to offset the glamour and stand free and clear of the glamour's control and distinguish truth for himself. For the everyday man who is not familiar with this mental dynamic, he will continue to be susceptible and controlled. In this case, a major purpose of the political organizer is working in collaboration with the educators, the trained observers, and the telepathic communicators, seed groups, who would be able to educate the public in understanding the larger political issue at hand in the context of embracing ideas and ideals, thus making higher and more enlightening decisions. And this goes back to what I said last month about we're starting to relate the seed groups together and how they're working and how they're interacting with each other. And they're overlapping. So when is authority not a glamour? In Esoteric Psychology 2, the Tibetans said that the service worker would have a willingness to work in a group as an integral part of the group and having no idea of personal ambition or any wish to be a leader. Eventually, members of the political organizers group will realize that ultimately the path is trod together with those who want to be free from any authority except that of the soul. For this calling, he must free himself from the individual personality concerns in favor of the higher group needs, which imposes its own set of rules through the law of service. By aligning with the group energy and purpose, he's working under conditions and rules that govern all activities. Its recognition presents new duties, responsibilities, and obligations. Together, these make up a new authority. Over time, the higher rhythm penetrates his individual consciousness, and he aligns himself with the group life and consciousness. And when the member is working with this new authority, this is known as occult obedience, and it is that which the masters and initiates respond to. Any comments on this information? Comments or questions?
No, I don't see anything yet.
All right, we'll continue. How is the will expressed through the rays? From rays and initiations, DK comments on rays, first, second, and third rays. On the first ray, if the initiate is upon the first ray and therefore working in the department of Manu, it will function in relation to races, nations, and the kingdoms in nature. He will use and express the innate will aspect through the Atmic nature, through the highest aspect of the spiritual triad, to which we give the inadequate name of the divine will. Students are apt to forget that the spiritual triad related to it as the monad in much the same way as a threefold personality is related to the soul. It expresses the three major aspects of Shambhalic energy, which all three of them are expressions of the will of the planetary logos of his essential purpose. If the initiate, this is continuing with the quotes here from Rays and Initiations, if the initiate is on the second ray and therefore is working in the department of the Christ, he will use the will through the medium of buddhi, the second aspect of the spiritual triad. And we understand that ultimately with the integration of the soul, going through the process, the path of probation, discipleship, and initiation, that buddhi will eventually replace the lower astral energies and tendencies. If the initiate is on the third ray and in the department of the Mahakohen, the Lord of Civilization and Cultures, he will work through the higher mind, the lowest aspect of the spiritual triad. Forget not, however, that none of these aspects can be regarded as higher or lower, for all are equally divine. Understanding of these ideas may come if, for instance, you realize that the expression of buddhi, or the intuition, in the consciousness of the spiritual man will lead to the use of will in working out the purposes of Shambhala in the field of religions, education, and salvaging or saving the life aspect in all forms in the three worlds. But it will have no relation to the individual and personal problems of man himself. So let's talk about leadership. What makes a person a leader? In the next two slides, this one and the next, I want to talk about the difference between a leader and a statesman in a political context. However, the primary focus will be around the characteristics of a statesman. The Google definition of a leader is a person that leads, rules, or inspires others. A leader can be the head of a family, a manager of a corporation, a leader in industry, or a leader of a nation who can grasp a situation or project and make it turn out the way he or she wants. Through his position, this person is generally seen as responsible and one whom others follow. This characterizes the vast majority of political leaders around the world. Note in these descriptions, I say nothing about the ethics or the morality or vision which is this individual may or may not have. A ruthless dictator is also a leader, but is lacking morality and ethics. From an esoteric viewpoint, the question to ask, is the individual motivated by higher ethics, such as influence from the soul, and possessing long-range vision and not motivated by personal ambition? In December's talk, when we talked about the educators, I discussed the concept of world discipleship. In most ways, this involves the aspirant disciple broadening their vision and their service work into a greater global context. World servers are driven by a finer set of values, such as cooperation, goodwill, synthesis, and work with divine indifference with consecration to the plan. World discipleship is the notion that education should teach the individual not only about the political governmental process, also civics, basic civics, but to develop a sense of synthesis within all humanity and note how it all relates together. Recalling what Alice Bailey said about world discipleship in Dino 1, a man becomes a world disciple in a technical sense when the vision is to him an important and determining fact in his consciousness, and one to which all his daily efforts are subordinated. He needs no one to reveal the plan to him. He knows. His sense of proportion is adjusted to the revelation, and his life is dedicated to bring the vision into factual existence. So what makes a person a statesman or a visionary leader? And I'll be expanding on this more in the next month's talk too. Otto von Bismarck, a statesman of the 19th century, said, "The statesman's task is to hear God's footsteps marching through history and try to catch on to his coattails as he marches past." From an esoteric viewpoint, a true statesman would most likely be a high-functioning disciple or initiate of some degree and would be able to simultaneously see the big picture and have a vision of the plan and how their country fits. He or she would use the will or first ray energy for enacting great change within society and possibly all civilization. We have examples in history, recent history in the last 100 years or so, Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, Malala, Mikhail Gorbachev, Golda Meir, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, and John F. Kennedy, to name a few. In the example of Dr. King, Martin Luther King, he had the ability of using rhetoric that spoke to a higher educated mind, but could also communicate in words to the everyday man. I'll be examining the concept of vision or the person being a visionary in more detail in February's talk. Putting aside any utopian or idealistic visions, the statesman at this level of international relations works subjectively with the Manu and Mahakoan and senses his part for achieving a gradual improvement in the relations between nations. With an ability for seeing the big picture, he views humanity as moving toward a brotherhood of nations as an ideal. The statesman is not a savior, but someone to point people in the right direction. We can consider characteristics such as demeanor, the ray makeup, disciple, initiate. In Rays and Initiations, DK says, it depends on the monadic will's effect upon the lower egoic individual self-will. This is especially important for the individual who is on the path of discipleship or initiation. A statesman of this caliber would undoubtedly have some awareness or sense of the soul that is group conscious and expressing the spirit of that soul on a national level. It also follows that the statesman would have a sense of his own core values, and his leadership model is based on firm ethical foundation. With his combined skills and experience, it underscores the idea of the necessity for rising above partisanship and separatism, limitations of nationalism, and the representing the higher ideal is a concept dedicated to the welfare of its citizens for now and into the future. The statesman will act as facilitator for enabling an immediate vision in practical stages for long-term recovery to naturally unfold. He would undoubtedly employ first and seventh-ray energies to bring diverse forces or seed groups of politics, finance, culture, education, science, and religion into a higher realization. Publicly, he or she would be able to contribute and communicate ideas of the need of a new story or vision of how we're connected, interrelated, and working together and not apart in and amongst communities, ethnic groups, races, and interacting with the environment. A statesman would have the ability for rallying people around a cause and creates a coherent group field of knowledge and wisdom. He would be able to work with Seed Group 1, the telepathic communicators, to help forge a new vision toward Seed Group 9, the servers and finance, for stimulating the economy. Seed Group 2, the trained observers, that is, in the broadcast journalists, talking heads, who will interview people and discuss elements of the new vision, new story, and expanding on what it means for the nation and civilization as a whole. In practical terms, the statesman, with his knowledge of government and its workings, makes it work through legislation and allocating funds to make the vision become a reality. In February's talk, as I said before, I'll expand more on ideas about how a visionary leader might act. There's also a number of organizations in today's world functioning on what I'll call spiritual think tanks, and they're composed of leading evolutionary thinkers, such as Greg Braden, Deepak Chopra, Gene Houston, and others, who are pooling their collective knowledge and wisdom to enable societal change and transformation, and how a statesman might act. Such organizations are a Center for Evolutionary Leadership. They support social evolution through educational programs and leadership. The Institute for Evolutionary Leadership enables learning and collective action for systems transformation through educational programs and community-centered strategic initiatives. I'm basically reading what these organizations are about. A third one is Win Without War. They are a group or a network of activists and organizations working for a more peaceful, progressive US foreign policy. And there's also the Shift Network, Stephen Dinan. Stephen Dinan was a speaker at the Seven Ray Conference about 4 years ago. His group wants to empower people on a journey of personal growth through media, education, and resources as an emerging culture to connect, collaborate, and co-create using the teachings of leading wisdom keepers and visionaries. This is just a fraction. I mean, there's units of service, as the Lucis Trust calls them. There's many organizations that are trying to bring forward a better thought form of collaboration and cooperation between groups of people and individuals. Does anybody have any comments or questions at this point?
No, I don't see any.
All right. Then let us continue. Developing the will to good. For the esotericist and people working in the political organizers group, any discussion about the will should be developing the will to good. First, let's define the difference between the goodwill and the will to good. Goodwill is first practice towards oneself. This is not self-indulgence, but a positive attitude about self. Through your thoughts and actions, with a positive attitude toward yourself, you can then do the same for others. It is literally the intent of the awake individual to practice good through all his actions. For him, it acts as an incentive for establishing right relationship between individuals and groups. The will to good is a term we apply toward altruistic and compassionate actions to ourselves and others in a conscious way. It can be a compulsion where the energy of love is behind the actions of the personality, acting and directing the personality or the personal will. It is more than just an enlightened attitude about one's personal expression, but consciously practiced towards others. As we know, the will to good is practiced by people and groups that are engaged in service-related activities. The will to good is an awakening and functioning of the higher spiritual will coming from the soul. Here, the personal will is rendered not only harmless through practice and understanding, but constructive. In this case, the soul influences the will of the personality to engage in service-related activities. Before this can happen, the individual must have decentralized his personality from lower tendencies and urges, that is, aggressive behavior and selfishness must be tamed, of course. This allows the individual to identify a new connection between the personal will and the higher spiritual will. The will to good is characterized with the individual being able to identify with the larger group purpose. This attitude is cultivated by being able to think in terms of the whole, using intuitive perception, implemented by love, expressed intelligently, and mindful of the next step humanity must take. The growth of the will to good for the individual is subjectively realized and seen by his or her own recognitions in consciousness. Eventually, the individual finds a group whose ideals and service correspond to his own. He affiliates with that group through their methods and plans, and this leads him to see himself as a part of a greater whole. Servers working in the world today are expressing the will to good by recognizing and bridging cleavages for helping humanity to move towards integration and synthesis. We have seen this activity in the world, particularly since World War II, of the trends toward the creation of partnerships, alliances, international organizations, and planning on a global level, ecumenical uniting of all faiths, and through aid to developing nations. They are dedicated towards unity and working to offset any form of activity that creates division, separation, and isolation. Wielding the will to good. We know that a man with a strong and dominant will often overpowers and corrupts others to bend to his will. The great laws of action, reaction, rhythm, and equilibrium operates in the world as in the inner moral spiritual spheres. History has shown us that those who commit evil acts inevitably attract evil upon themselves. Therefore, it is necessary both for the general welfare and our own that our motivation should be good, as well as strong and skillful. Only such a will can give us practical success and the highest inner satisfaction. The destructive aspect of the will should not necessarily be confused with the wrong use. The destruction of the old outworn forms must necessarily precede the building of the new age. Although many social, political, religious, and other forms have served their purpose in the past, they are no longer adequate to the new mentality or mindset or to the needs of humanity's growth in the present or into the future. The destructive aspect of the will is needed for right elimination of these limiting forms, obviously with skill and wisdom to be enacted. To this end, the will to good must be wielded and invoked through all the seed groups, particularly in today's world, through the political organizers, telepathic communicators, and trained observers seed groups. Their work as a focused consciousness will facilitate the higher universal will that helps humanity evolve on this planet so it can move to the next evolutionary level. When this happens, mankind becomes wiser and learns better how to wield the energies of the will to good towards positive ends. For those who are engaged in diplomacy or conflict resolution, this action can generate goodwill. They know to examine a problem from every point of view. They see the larger frame of reference in the larger scheme. They establish common goals to be reached, and they formulate it clearly, keeping it ever present and easily referenced. They find and establish points of agreement already existing and reachable. Then they examine objectively as possible the points of conflict and disagreement. They prepare to make partial sacrifices in order to achieve the greatest benefit for all, and identify how to take constructive actions. Any comments or questions?
No, nothing right now.
All right. Rules of the road. As an aside, a big if an individual service worker, politician, or member of the fifth seed group would study esoteric materials, he or she might read the rules of the road as a self-imposed discipline to guide their conscious activities. From Dino 1, the rules of the road can be a guide for the spiritual seeker as he passes from the path of probation onto the path of discipleship. While following these rules, the seeker learns to practice discipline, discretion, and desirelessness in helping himself and others on the path. The 6 rules of the road describe the razor-edge path and a requirement for self-imposed discipline for anybody in a leadership position or government or industry to follow. By following these rules, they will function to dissipate glamour and illusion and help present the truth wherever it is. The service worker comes to understand that the nature of service is to establish group interplay and group relation. Subjectively, the hierarchy is working towards this goal and wants groups to work subjectively, telepathically, and synthetically under the law of group and law of service. So the rules of the road, I'm going to read each one and then make a slight comment on each one, and as they apply to leaders and or statesmen. Rule 1, the road is trodden in the full light of day, thrown upon the path by those who know and lead. Naught can be hidden, and at each turn, a man must face himself. So in this case, the leader, the statesman, he's transparent in all his activities and his rhetoric and activities, yes. Rule number 2, upon the road, the hidden stands revealed. Each sees and knows the villainy of each. And yet there is, with the great revelation, no turning back, no spurning of each other, and no shakiness upon the road. The road goes forward in today. This speaks to an awareness and knowingness of how glamour and illusion are present, and seeing it in your fellow brothers and sisters who are also in the fifth political organizers group. Rule number 3, upon that road, one wanders not alone. There's no rush, no hurry, and yet there's no time to lose. Each pilgrim, knowing this, presses his footsteps forward and finds himself surrounded by his fellow men. Some move ahead, he follows after. Some move behind, he sets the pace. He travels not alone. In this case, the visionary leader or statesman lays out a vision. He considers the future generations to be impacted and he invites others to follow. And we recall that Alice Bailey said somewhere, I don't remember where the quote is, she says, "Make haste slowly." Rule number 4. 3 things the pilgrim must avoid: the wearing of a hood, the veil which hides his face from others, the carrying of a water pot which only holds enough for his own wants, the shouldering of a staff without a crook to hold. In this case, the leader or the statesman and worker within the political organizers group cannot work secretly. He must be transparent in all his actions. Rule number 5. Each pilgrim on the road must carry with him what he needs: a pot of fire to warm his fellow men, a lamp to cast its rays upon his heart and show his fellow men the nature of his hidden life, purse of gold, which he scatters not upon the road, but shares with others, a sealed vase wherein he carries all his aspiration to cast before the feet of him who awaits to greet him at the gate, a sealed vase. In this context, in the political context, all workers within the political organizers group must become the vehicles of the principle of sharing and goodwill. Rule number 6. The pilgrim, as he walks upon the road, must have an open ear, the giving hand, the silent tongue, the chastened heart, the golden voice, the rapid foot, and the open eye, which he sees the light. He knows he travels not alone. So through his silent tongue and golden voice, he listens and he says nothing that divides or separates, and provides skillful leadership. He invites all to participate, knowing this work is enabling the plan to work out. So when a member of this seed group is working with a new authority that is coming from the soul, this is known as occult obedience. New authority is that which the masters and initiates respond to, and it is twofold in its nature. That is, it is an awareness of the emerging light beyond as an essence of the plan sensed. Its recognition presents new duties, responsibilities, and obligations. Together, these make up the new authority. And the second point for the masters and initiates to follow is an obligation for the disciple to follow the rules of the road as guiding principles for right leadership. And a link to the rules of the road handout are posted in the chat. And of course, they'll be posted on the Makara website. Any questions or comments?
Marianne says the rules of the road are so wonderful. Thank you.
Great. All right, moving on. GK talked about tasks of the political organizers to accomplish. Central to these tasks is developing the importance of education, understanding the law, and eventually developing the concept of statesmanship in the general population. From Dino 1, GK states, the political organizers group will concern itself with political factors in every nation and will work with the problems of civilization and with the relationships existing between nations by bringing about international understanding to the everyday man and their major objective. To achieve this awareness to the average citizenry, they must become educated to seeing the importance of working across cultures, ethnic groups, and nationalities. This can be done through the activities of government and their institutions. From externalization of the hierarchy, GK states about the importance of education. The processes of education, of law, and government are so closely allied, and it is a system that brings the best ideals of the thinkers of the day by the new group of world servers. And it will act as a clearinghouse for linking body between educators of time of the time, those whose task it is to enforce the law, and the statesmen who are chosen by the educated masses to formulate the laws whereby they should be governed. As a restatement from December's talk in education, because the masses of men are as yet relatively so little evolved, the task of this group of workers must therefore necessarily be dependent upon the success of the educators' work of the world. Education will raise the standard of awareness of the general public to a higher state of political understanding and awareness, which would stimulate the lower mental plane into awareness understanding. Currently, of course, we have an emotional reactivity of circumstances, which is being put out by some politicians today. So intelligently seeing facts and understanding what's going on in the world from a viewpoint of the higher reasoning is what we're learning to work towards. In Esoteric Psychology 1, DK said, mankind is at last becoming mentally centered, and hence we have in the world at this time many and varied attempts to straighten out affairs along business, national, economic, social, and other lines, to produce some system in order with the objective, unrealized consciously as yet, of inaugurating the new age. Owing, however, to an almost universal ignorance as to the laws of thought, ideals sensed and are not correctly interpreted by the mind, nor applied in such a way they are of general and appropriate application. Hence, the need today is for sound teaching on the laws of thought and building thought forms set forth from the divine mind. Here, GK suggests that because education does not properly inform us of the importance of government and the need for statesmanship, we attract to ourselves dictators and demagogues who usurp our rights and appeal to our lowest base desires and instincts. As an aside on education and life experience, we note that the vast majority of people or leaders in government around the world, from the community to the national level, are people in their 30s and older. And why is this? Many educators know that a young person's brain and mind does not fully develop until sometime in their 20s. This is an indication of the fact that they have not acquired enough life experience or wisdom to be useful or make wise decisions. We can also look at this statement from an esoteric viewpoint, where the individual should acquire some life experience in developing his or her mind via soul conditioning and infusion, and could become useful from the hierarchy's viewpoint in world service. This might change with the current generation of young people, such as Greta Thunberg, a clear-minded activist, albeit one point focused on the climate change legislation. But there are people, Greta Thunberg, for those who may or may not know, I believe she's from Sweden, and she's a remarkably outspoken teenager. I think she's 19 now. Teenager on the climate change legislation. She deliberately and directly confronts world leaders at the United Nations on this concept. Any comments or questions?
Nope.
All right. So let me conclude by making some comments. Political Organizers Seed Groups is a group that is very social at its core and works with workers from the other seed groups. On the physical plane, this seed group influences humanity through public administration and provides national and global leadership. They deal with problems of the political and social order within civilization and the relationship existing between nations. In today's world, it is quite possibly the most important of the seed groups, as it works in collaboration with a number of the other seed groups to achieve common ends for the benefit of the greater group humanity. Due to the nature of their functionality, the political organizers group, they often interact with compassionate world workers, dynamic entrepreneurs, forward-thinking designers and educators, the brightest minds in education, science, and the arts, and spiritual activists. This seed group is mostly involved with intuiting ideas on how governments of the world can function free from glamour and authority and illusion of power. Members of this group must be able to work with ideas and be capable of defining the best forward-thinking ideas for advancing humanity's spiritual progress. They do this through hierarchical impression by receiving the idea or thought form, where it is then telepathically sent to politicians who will adapt it into policy. So the mind begins to function as a bridge, a channel of energy communication between the plan as it exists in conscious intent of hierarchy and world affairs as they must change and adapt to planetary purpose held in solution by hierarchy. Thus, the disciple cooperates in the task of establishing the thought form of solution and also trains himself for active service in human affairs. Many of the ideas to change may be timely for humanity, but the organizers must also consider practical questions existing on the physical plane. These have their own requirements to be honored if excessive and unnecessary destruction is to be avoided. We have seen examples of this form of numerous movements that have happened in the last 100 years, such as implementing civil rights for minorities, the cause of women's suffrage. Both movements resulted and continue to foster great change in consciousness in society, and on occasion, destruction through violence and loss of life and tensions persisting over the generations. From these and other impressed changes from hierarchy in Shambhala will come a different mental orientation at the level of knowing, where humanity will become aware that they together are moving towards creating one humanity, regardless of race, culture, or nation. As the seventh ray energy of Aquarius is pouring into the world, its transformational energy of synthesis demands the end of the present cleavage between the inner spiritual realm and, and the outer material world. This involves implementing the principle of sharing of resources as one of the essential conditions for the externalization of the hierarchy and the reappearance of the Christ. If we are wanting to establish harmony within our society and emerge from the current chaos, then we must recognize the dynamic where harmonious forces seek to bring balance between the higher spiritual energies and the tensions of the lower 18 subplanes, where the majority of humanity resides. We understand that right leadership comes for those members of the New Group of World Servers in all the seed groups who act on impression from their soul and the hierarchy. They are invoking higher reasoning to remedy crises related to political, social, and economic upheavals. Thought form activity requires that they to clear away anything that blocks this type of spiritual understanding. We understand that right leadership involves truth-telling with regards to science and the pandemic, and the right allocation of resources to help individuals and the economy, and to mitigate the effects of climate change. Ideally, these actions result in right human relations working out through society and through each of the seed groups. Such is the challenge. That's all I have for this presentation. For next month, we'll continue exploring different aspects and expressions of the political seed group, political organizer seed group. For example, we'll be talking about a new vision for humanity. We'll be talking about addressing problems of humanity and Alice Bailey's or DK's concept of an ideal government, could be, and ideas on how to bring about peace in the world. Does anybody have any comments or questions?
David, I just wanted to say, Our next meeting is going to be on the 12th of February.
All right.
And within the next couple of hours, I'll process this and I'll send out the notice that says the recording has been posted to Makara. And I want you all to know that David sends me the slides about 5 to 7 days prior to the next webinar. And at that time, I post them on Makara, getting ready for the next webinar. So those of you, when you get the posted to Makara, keep that link because you can go in a couple of days before, download the slides. It might be easier than trying to do it with me attaching them in the chat. So that's just a little.
Yeah, and also a comment from me personally is that I know I put a lot of information into my talks, and it can be challenging to follow these concepts. So certainly reviewing this information after my verbal live presentation is very, very useful. So I definitely encourage people to do that too. And certainly pass this information to anybody that could be interested in this subject.
Okay, I don't see any other. Okay. Vivian says, thank you. I haven't yet found how to download from the chat without escaping off. So yeah, it can be a little challenging. So if you just go to Makara in advance, a couple of days in advance, you should find the slides there. So okay, that's all I see. And of course, all of the attachments. So the rules of the road, if you weren't able to get it from the chat, that's going to be there on Makara along with the slides and the recordings. So.
Well, thank you all for your interest and at least subjective participation, of course.
Tia says that she really liked this section discussion on glamour and authority. She says, thank you.
Yeah, there's, all these different subjects could be easily expanded, and there's lots of information on glamour and authority. Of course, when we get to the 7-Ray conference coming up in May, a few months, I will be I'll be expanding on this concept. It'll be around the 6th ray, and I'll be talking about the glamour of authority there too. So I'll be expanding on that a little bit more. So stay tuned. There's a lot more information here.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. And like we said, 12 February is the next one, part 2 of the political and leader group. So
that's right.
Okay, Michael, I can only leave. I could stop the recording.